For many years, I used to conduct a concert for the Sacred Warrior on Remembrance Day. And part of my intention to do that was to offer new dimensions to this day of remembrance of those who fought and those who fell in war. Because I sort of noticed that the normal rhetoric around this was this strange kind of honoring and almost celebration and romanticism of war, while also, yes, remembering the tragic events of war. And there was lacking kind of a active honoring of peace, for one. And what I would bring forth in these concerts with sharing songs and poetry and philosophical tidbits is I would bring forth understanding about the warrior archetype, which I draw from the men's work that I do. Because when you really delve into the ins and outs of the warrior archetype and the anguish and the pain and the grief that is there, from my work with men over the years, I discovered that there's a tremendous amount of unresolved grief and trauma that's really stuck in this psychological aspect of ourselves. And a lot of this is because our culture, Western culture, has not, until now, and we're starting to see this now be developed, but up until now, we haven't really had an appropriate understanding of trauma, an appropriate understanding of how to process war. In a lot of the wars that our ancestors, our grandfathers and great grandfathers fought in, when they would come back from war, they were usually just given an honoring, a celebration that the war is over, and then sort of asked to just go back into their regular jobs. And usually they led lives of quiet, if not very visceral suffering after that because of what they had seen and the traumas and the events that they had witnessed and experienced during their wartime. I've been told that in certain ancient cultures, they had an understanding much more of human psychology, and that when warriors would come back from battle, in some cultures they would be separated from the rest of the village, and the medicine men and women would take time to put them through a ritual where they would take off the kind of ferocity of their masculine energy, which they amplified to go and fight in battle, so that they could return to a kind of civility, to a kind of more gentle, balanced way of being. They understood that the psyche sort of puts on these archetypes, but also there's a taking off of these archetypes that is needed, a return to kind of the neutral human point. We don't have this understanding, and we've lacked this, and it's created devastating effects on our culture. In fact, I remember leading one workshop on the archetypes when a woman approached me afterwards. I believe it was at one of these concerts, and she said that abuse started in her family line when her grandfather came back from war. And I think a lot of people can share that when men come back from fighting and seeing all the brutality of war and the injustices that are committed, perhaps they've committed some of these injustices and the violence, it really bludgeons and absolutely distorts the human soul. And of course, on this day of remembrance, we also honor all the innocent victims of war, the horrors of war, especially when we look back at the two world wars and the amount of incredible and absolutely horrific violence that was beset upon humans by other humans. And it is with every Remembrance Day that my main intention is to share a message that of active peace, that we start to continue to build a civilization and a culture and understanding where there will never be war again in our world. War is truly one of the most horrific things that we as humans can do. It's the epitome of madness to fight against each other. There is no need to fight against each other. If we really learn how to live in balance with the sacred ecology of the planet, there is enough for everyone. If we learn how to work with the healing arts, if we learn to even work with the realms of sacred sexuality to help heal this gender divide between men and women, if we develop more our skills of communication and mindfulness and our spiritual sense, where we're more in touch with that unified realm that connects all things interdependently in our, not only on Earth, but in the very cosmos, a kind of cosmic consciousness. And what's amazing is that this is a message that I've pretty much brought forth year after year after year, and I can say that now you can really see this burgeoning culture in the world. Especially the young people, they're starting to take on things like shadow work, looking at PTSD, authentic relating, nonviolent communication, the building of communities of peace. You're starting to see increasingly this awareness that we do not have to live with this inevitable prospect of war in our lives, that we can actually build a civilization of forever peace even on this planet. And that's not to say that there isn't also an important rising of what is called the spiritual warrior, because this is definitely starting to become a part of our more mainstream awareness collectively on the planet. And that is that a lot of the conflicts that we see externalized in the world are but projections of an internal conflict within ourselves. And this is why the spiritual disciplines and spiritual practices really are disciplines. If you've ever met or if you've ever read of great spiritual masters, these are people who radiate a kind of warriorship. They're devoted to their practices. They're dedicated to excelling. They're dedicated to continually actualizing their potential. They're dedicated to their health. They're dedicated to cultivating harmony in all aspects of their life. And this is why I fell in love with spirituality so deeply when I had a spiritual awakening in my early 20s, because I saw in spirituality pathways to the most excellent forms of our humanity possible. And that is why spirituality in the ancient world was simply just the practical means of cultivating good humans. And now it's becoming absolutely captivating to the masses, which is incredible. And people are starting to realize that a spiritual warriorship doesn't mean we wield any kind of violence internally or externally. It actually means we become warriors of love. Now, what does that mean, to be a warrior of love? Well, that means that our heart becomes this kind of resource of ferocious compassion. That anytime we notice negative thoughts within ourselves, that we enwrap ourselves with awareness of it. We learn how to create skillful detachments so that we can observe and watch these triggers that are probably rooted in our own pain. And we learn how to make peace with ourselves through the arts of contemplation, reflection, and meditation. We learn to go towards those uncomfortable situations in our life, whether it's feuds with family members or friends. We try and forge compassion in our internal arts, in our reflective meditative practices, to try and build empathy and reach out a tender hand to try and ease situations with emotional intelligence and the powerful sword of empathy, which can cut through a lot of the egoic divides that we see in our world. This is important more than ever right now, because we are living in an age where we are witnessing the end of duality. And you can see this in the binary oppositions that we're being plagued by in our political systems, in our socio-political thought on the grandest level. We're being pitted against each other. You can look at this in the elections of most countries in the Western world, where you have two parties always stationed against each other. And they whirl us in this whirlwind. They magnetize us to this, and they get us to be attached to these labels of us and them. And then we just war. And usually the elites who are running the whole political charade, they're the ones actually just laughing in the background, because they know that this disempowers us to keep us externalized out there. So this is for us all to really look at, where are we labeling these us and thems in our life? Are we falling into this great polarization that's happening right now, which is really the detoxification of dualism? We're seeing the polarity actually be enthused because the power of unity is rising so profoundly. And it's causing the polarity to become further and further and further polarized until finally, drawing from a law in Taoist thought, when yin and yang move furthest away from each other, there's a moment when they come back into dynamic unity. And this is just a law of the universe that the Taoists perceived. And for a lot of people, I think they're reaching that breaking point where when they get politicized on one side and the other, left and right, for example, this political polarization just reach a point where people really realize that that shadow warrior aspect that wants to kill and destroy another, it really takes them to the edge of acting out. And then, of course, we hope and we pray that conscience can be built where we can realize, no, we have to go about this another way. So in some ways, the torment of this warring that's being provoked in our social lives is also a means to inspire us to desire to forge peace in our world. And there's so many examples of extreme enemies who have been able to forge peace with each other merely by just having a conscious conversation and starting to realize what are the needs that each of them have, building that empathy and realizing that a lot of the conflicts that we have in our lives and in the world are built upon just the emotions that come up when someone doesn't believe what we believe. And because we're not an emotionally intelligent species, our emotions can actually possess us. And then we want to hurt another person. Whereas if we just took a moment with our breath to come back to our center and really learn to listen to each other, we'd realize that a lot of the terrain of conflict is really just misunderstandings. So the spiritual warrior understands all this subtlety and really is a force for unity in the world, a kind of uh, relentless source of goodness that wherever it goes, wherever it sees conflict, it brings this strong spiritual warriorship to bring peace to those zones. So that can even look like someone becoming, and I've been this person myself. I've broken up fights. I've taken on conflicts that I've seen around me that aren't necessarily personally my conflicts, and help to resolve them and keep the greater peace in the world. So on this date, Remembrance Day, we do remember. We go back with our minds and we remember and we send love to all those brave ones who were often sent to wars that were, projected by the media to be some kind of vainglorious fight against good and evil. But really, a lot of the wars that we've seen were all just for corrupt reasons, to steal resources, to move money, to make money, and to do untold torment, untold brutality upon humans. So we remember and we have compassion for those who have fought in wars, knowing that a lot of them were deceived. And we send our prayers to those ancestral lines that have been traumatized, that still hold these wounds of war. And we aspire in our lifetime to be the change makers, to make sure to be exemplars for a world where there will never ever be war again, where no one has to suffer these kinds of injustices, these kinds of traumatizing brutalities. And we remember all the innocent ones that fell in war as well, and we send them our prayers. It's up to us to be bastions of peace and to work for this great peace, and it is absolutely possible that we can bring this great peace into our world. So today, remember those that have fallen, and as well draw a great honoring to this force of great peace and become a force of this great peace in the world.